You could just help me welcome our guest artist this afternoon, Miss Janet Yieh.
Hello everyone, my name is Janet Yieh and I'm delighted to be here today to present this organ recital. I've had the opportunity to spend the last couple days getting to know this instrument, and it's really been a treat to not only be here practicing but to get to meet a lot of the congregation this morning in the service here at the church. The first thing that I have for you today is an impromptu for the organ by Samuel Coleridge Taylor. In his lifetime, Coleridge Taylor was so well known that one of his cantatas, the Feast of Hiawatha, which you might recognize as a Longfellow poem, was actually performed as frequently around the world as Handel's Messiah and Mendelssohn's Elijah. So he was a violinist and a composer, and he called himself an Anglo-African composer because his father was African-American, his mother was British. And he got to a point in his career where on his American tour, he was actually invited to the White House to meet President Roosevelt, which is quite extraordinary. So we'll start today with an impromptu for organ by Samuel Coleridge Taylor. We'll turn now to one of the classic composers for the organ, and that's Johann Sebastian Bach. Now, you may know Bach as a composer who wrote so much music in the orchestral world, keyboard instruments. For organists, he is one of the seminal composers in the Baroque era. And if you were to perform all of the music written in his lifetime, in his career as a Kapellmeister and an organist, it would take 18 hours to play all of the organ music that he composed. Now, this particular prelude and fugue in A minor, BWV 543, we think was written between 1708 and 1713. There are a few different versions of the prelude, and that makes sense because the prelude was often something that was almost improvisatory in nature, compared to the fugue, which is quite structured and quite formal. And this is a piece that we sometimes call the fugue the Great A minor Fugue, because later, not only did Brahms and Mendelssohn, but Liszt also actually wrote piano transcriptions of this particular piece. It's one of my favorites, so I hope you enjoy the Bach A minor Prelude and Fugue. My mother always said after seeing the organist play the pedal parts in Bach pieces, she was convinced that Bach must have been an excellent dancer. Fancy footwork. Now, the next piece that I'm playing is somewhat connected to this idea of German Baroque music, but it's actually inspired by South German Baroque music, and it's a set of variations written in the style of Pachelbel. The composer of these variations is Christa Rakic, and she actually began by receiving a tune in the middle of a live concert, and that tune was Lob den Herrn, which is praise to the Lord, the Almighty, familiar hymn tune for many of us. She received this theme and then improvised this whole set of variations in a concert on the beautiful Richards and Fowkes organ down at St. John's in Stamford, Connecticut, not far from here. And later she was convinced to write these down. And I think it's a wonderful way to get to hear all the different stops and sounds of the organ, because you'll hear the clarinet, you'll hear the reeds and the swell, you'll hear some of the positive pipes that are right in front of us. And finally, here's another tidbit I learned just today, that your director of music here, Peter Needman, was actually a student of Christa Rakic's at UConn. We won't say how many years ago, but he said she was an excellent teacher. So here are variations on Lob den Herrn by Christa Rakic. of two pieces that I have paired together. The first one is called Reverie by William Grant Still. The second is called Retrospection by Florence Price. Now, both of these are trailblazing American composers. William Grant Still was a prolific writer. He had composed several ballets, operas, symphonies, and he was the first African-American composer to have a major orchestral symphony played by a major American orchestra in our country's music history. And this particular piece, Reverie, is very sort of thoughtful and in almost a modal minor key area. The second piece is by Florence Price. There's a lot of ongoing research about Price because she was born in Little Rock, Arkansas. She did her training as an organist at New England Conservatory in Boston, and spent most of her career then working as a musician in Chicago. And when she was there, she was working with Leo Sowerby, who was the organist at the Cathedral of St. James in Chicago. She was writing all sorts of fabulous music. There's a story I'll tell you later about a connection between her and Guillemot. But both of these composers are extraordinary for not only the fact that William Grant Still wrote 200 pieces of music, not to be outdone, Florence Price wrote, I think, about 300, but very recently there were some renovations going on in a house in Chicago, and they discovered in the attic that there were boxes and boxes of her handwritten manuscripts. So when we say the research is ongoing, it really is a quite exciting moment. This piece by her, I think, really captures sort of a 1930s sense. If you have heard the theater organ, I think there's some wisps of that in here. So, Reverie by William Grant Still, followed by Retrospection, Florence Price. So now to look a little bit at an area of music that, especially in sacred music and church music, is quite relevant to us as we think about what is distinctly American sacred music. I have a set of 3 pieces for you that are spirituals for organ. They are arrangements by Chicago-based composer Marianne Kim. And what I love about this is that she's taken familiar melodies. The first one that you'll hear is Steal Away. And the second one, I was talking to Peter and he said it's something that the choir here has sung arrangements of, and ending with a sort of very upbeat arrangement of Every Time I Feel the Spirit. Something that she encourages the organists to do when they would play her pieces is to look through the sort of full collection of spirituals that she's arranged and to kind of build a suite. So that's what I've done. There are 3 movements that you'll hear together. And something that she also says in the foreword of this book is spirituals, thinking about the genres of jazz and thinking of gospel music and blues music. These are uniquely American styles, and therefore it is really worthy of our sort of consideration as musicians, as organists, as classical musicians in the sort of sacred music world, that it is part of something that has influenced so many generations of composers. Those that you just heard, William Grant Still, who was active in the Harlem Renaissance and worked closely with Langston Hughes, and Florence Price, who was in Chicago in this moment where gospel and blues were really taking off. So here are 3 spirituals for organ, arranged by Marianne Kim. Now the next piece is by a living composer, Carenza Briggs, who's based in London, and I've had the opportunity to work closely with her because at my church in New York City, Church of the Heavenly Rest, we had the opportunity to actually commission her and her father, organist David Briggs, to actually co-write a psalm cycle. And he's based in New York at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And when we commissioned this, we realized that they would actually be writing from across the Atlantic from each other. So what we did is we had our rector, our priest, choose 7 psalm texts. And then Carenza wrote movements 2, 4, and 6, and David wrote movements 1, 3, and 5. And it was a piece for choir and organ and brass and our choristers and percussion. And for the 7th movement, they decided what they would do would be that he would write 4 movements in New York, then send it through music software through Sibelius to London, where she would then write the next 4 bars, which is pretty unconventional, but we ended up with a really exciting premiere 2 years ago. So when we had the chance to perform this work, David Briggs came to play the organ, and Carenza came and sort of did a composer's forum with us. What's so lovely about her writing style is that she writes from the perspective of being a singer herself. So often a lot of her choral music is lyrical and really striking to sing. Now this particular piece that we're going to hear next is called Light in Darkness. And it was commissioned in 2019 by the UK Choir and Organ magazine, together with St. Andrews University. So she's really, at that point, taking a dive into some of the more atmospheric sounds of the pipe organ. So this is a piece which really plays with time, and if you're a fan of Messiaen, it sort of has that language to it. So here is Light in Darkness by Carenza Briggs. So now we've come to the last piece of the program, and as we've started from the beginning, it's been a little bit of a tour around the world, but I hope that you found some connections in the way that this program was sort of designed and put together. So I promised you a story about Florence Price and Alexandra Gilmour, and I see some organists in the audience here. So this is such an interesting piece. It's Gilmour's first sonata for organ, written, we think, in around 1874. And this particular piece really kicked off his sort of symphonic organ writing. And Florence Price was, as we learned earlier, a student at New England Conservatory. She was majoring in organ, and when she was 16 years old, Alexandra Gilmour was coming on a tour of America where he would perform, do some master classes, and teach around the country. And when her teachers discovered that he was coming, they actually had her learn this sonata to play for him. And then later, Florence Price went on to write symphonies for organ and sonatas for organ. And so if you ever look at Florence Price's first sonata for organ, it is completely inspired by this piece that you'll hear next. It's almost exactly the same. It has 3 movements. It starts in a minor key, ends with a big toccata, has a lovely sort of soft movement in between. So composers that you would think are sort of from totally different continents, writing completely different sort of generations of organ music, actually met and actually inspired each other directly. So before I play the last piece, I do want to thank my wonderful host, Peter Niedman, who invited me here, and it's been lovely to get to know all of his work and all that is happening here in Newington. And thank you all for coming out on a cold Sunday afternoon. It's been great to be with you all. So here's the final movement of Alexandra Gilmour's Sonata for Organ.